So, friends, the time has come. We knew it'd be here. It's happened sooner than I thought it would, to be perfectly honest with you. But anyways, we've already talked about boobs. Now we're going to talk about butts.
This is some real butt candy.
Okay, since I'm a genius, I set myself up with the boobs video to cover 500 years, instead of a much more logical 100 to 200 years, and we're going to be doing the same thing in this video. 500 years of butts. Kinda. More like 500 years of the lower half, but let's be honest, 500 years of butts just sounds so much better. Now, before we get into the discussion of 500 years of bootyliciousness, I think there are some larger general points that need to be made about feminine dress in Europe for the past 500 years. First is that the vast majority of this timeline is going to focus on England, France, Spain, and North America. I won't really be touching on the nuanced fashions we see, especially in the 1500s and 1600s, in the Germanic states, Italy, Scandinavian countries, etc. This distinction is important for the first part of this video, but once the 1700s hit, fashion becomes much more universal in the Western world, give or take a few quirks. And with the regionality in dress, we must also quickly touch on the social status and its impact on clothing. Fashions differed according to social class, and so things like hoopskirts and farthingales are going to show up more predominantly in the highest social echelons for a good part of this video. While I will discuss middle and lower classes when I can, I just want to make it clear that social class had a massive impact on what kind of clothing and fashion were worn. Put the coffee down real fast. Secondly, while discussing the shapes of the feminine lower half, we are also going to be discussing the concept of space and how women occupied public spaces with their dress. This idea of using fashion to take up space, command attention, and create physical distance between themselves, men, and other women is an important part of the debate and reflection, especially when we take into consideration the gendering of fashion as well as societal gender norms. Women occupying space, as we will come to understand, made their male contemporaries uncomfortable, and this discomfort is something that deserves a separate discussion in its own right. Like Sarah Bendel points out in her paper, Take Measure of Your Wine and Flaunting Garments, the Farthingale Gender and the Consumption of Space in Elizabethan and Jacobean England, most criticisms surrounding boned hoopskirts are written by men who focus on their discomfort of women taking up too much physical space. While we won't actually be discussing this discomfort and the power games that are associated with female dress, it is just something I would like for you all to kind of keep in the back of your mind while we go through this timeline. Finally, I want to take a minute to thank the sponsor of this week's video, Likewise app. For those of you who don't know, I'm Libra rising and Libra moon, so I have a tendency to take the trope about Libra's inability to make decisions personally. I also really dread that moment when you sit down on the couch with your partner, roommate, sibling, or friend, having just finished a great TV show and not really knowing what to watch next. Flipping through Netflix, Hulu, Disney, HBO Max, Amazon, Peacock, Paramount Plus, Acorn, and on and on and on and on and on and on. The overwhelming amount of choice mixed with all of that Libra-ness in me means that it is really, really hard for me to find a show at random that I want to watch. If you don't believe me, ask my husband. Luckily, I was turned on to Likewise, a totally free app that helps solve the problem of indecision. Likewise uses smart technology and recommendations from app users to help you find your new favorite TV show, movie, book, or podcast. All I had to do is sign up, select some movies and books and podcasts that I already enjoy, and bam! I can start finding recommendations immediately. Another great option in Likewise is the Find Now, where you can find recommendations based off of filters, TV show or movie, your preferred streaming services, and what genre you want to watch. Immediately, there is a list of movies to pick from, so I can happily binge something new while I sew. So if you would like to have an app that makes your media consumption a lot easier, follow the link in the description below or go to on.likewise.com/abbycox to download the app and sign up for Likewise. The best part, it is totally free, like 100% free, totally free to use, download, and it's really easy to use. You can also follow me on the app. I'm at Abby Cox and make fun of all my nerdy tastes and terrible tastes in movie, TV shows, podcasts, and more. Hope you like astrology. Thanks again to Likewise for sponsoring this week's video. As much as I might have mild regrets about doing 500-year timeline reviews, mostly because my ego hates how gappy my knowledge is from 1500 to about 1750, we really can't have this discussion without starting at the 1500s, because it is the 1500s when we see the groundwork for all future hoops, bustles, and bump pads being laid out. At the turn of the century in England and France, we are seeing a continuation of soft natural skirt shapes that were the standard in centuries earlier. Kirtles, which is just basically a full-length dress, were pretty narrow at the hips compared to later decades, skimming over the hips so that way the figure was visible, but there was plenty of movement. Most kirtles were fitted at the bust upper part of the body and then used triangular gores or similar shaping to help flare the skirts out at the hem. The use of gores in skirts and dresses makes it possible to have very full skirts at the hem with minimal to no bulk at the waist. The use of gored or shaped skirts comes in and out of fashion just for now. 100 years ago, 50 years ago, it's constant, just ebbs and flows, ebbs and flows. In the 1520s and 30s, the skirts were fuller, in part because we're seeing separate waist seams become standard for women's gowns. And this separate waist seam allows for a lot more fullness to be added to the skirt. Another reason is the amount of layers that women are wearing at this time that help build out the skirts. And part of this fullness was achieved by wearing layers of skirts and carefully pleating the fabric to help create the full shape around the back of the skirt. Around the hips, the skirts flared out in a conical shape or an A-line skirt shape. From period images, we can see that the skirts are soft and there doesn't appear to be any sort of bone skirt being worn underneath. For a better idea of women's layers for Henrican dress, I suggest you check out Samantha Bullett's dressing video of a Tudor noblewoman. The first English reference to wearing a farthingale happens in 1545 for Princess Elizabeth's wardrobe. Quote, "Satin de Bruges, crimson pro una verdingale." However, in Spain, farthingales have been around since the late 1400s and were known as verdugados, which evolved into farthingale or vardingale in 16th and 17th century English spelling. The Spanish farthingale was a skirt that had rows of stiffened cord, reed, and eventually baleen that created a lightweight but structural conical shape. There is visual evidence that these farthingales were made out of a variety of fabrics, from expensive silks to common fustian, which is a linen wool blended fabric that has a nap to it. They could have been visible when worn or worn underneath outer skirts to help hold and keep the fashionable conical shape. You can start to see this transition a bit in imagery, going from the softer skirts to a much more structural appearance, though a lot of the other designs seen in the Henrican era stay relatively the same. As fashion moves almost as fast as Henry VIII's marriage licenses, we eventually reach the 1570s and 80s, which I lovingly refer to as swollen tick core. In the last quarter of the 16th century, we see proportions swell up faster than roadkill on a country road in August. To match the power sleeves, you needed to have full skirts, which brings us to the bum roll. This style of farthingale, or bum roll, was worn through the early 1600s and is illustrated in the satirical print from 1600. This large roll was starting to ruffle some feathers and laid the groundwork for future satirical poems, jokes, and prints. Right? Pretty quickly though. The rolls are no longer enough as they are double proof to a much larger proportions.
And a roll is a roll. And if we don't get no tolls, then we don't eat no rolls.
Thanks to the new farthingale design known as the French farthingale. Modern costumers and academics often refer to this style as a wheel or drum farthingale, but period sources seem to only refer to this garment as farthingales or French farthingales. So that's what we're gonna call it here today. Come on. This large flying saucer was worn primarily by the nobility, as lower sorts did not have the time, space, or money to deal with the silhouette. However, with the rapid growth of the wealthy middle class and their consumption of the once hard-to-buy fabrics and fashions, merchant wives were mocked for picking up the French farthingale style. In the play The Shoemaker's Holiday from 1600, they mock how quickly new money adopts these aristocratic fashions. "Art thou acquainted with nor a farthingale maker nor a French hood maker? I must enlarge my bum, ha ha! How shall I look at a hood?" Pretty oddly, I think. As with all things though, the French farthingale fell out of fashion sometime in the 1620s, though small bum rolls seem to still be worn for some of the fashions in various locations. The one place where a farthingale or a hoop skirt never seems to ever fall out of royal fashion. Thanks, Griff. The one place where a farthingale or hoop skirt never seems to fall out of royal fashion, though, is in Spain. So let's quickly break this down. For the second quarter of the 1600s, the waist is long and the curves are kickin', and I'm thinking about stickin', but overall, it is a much softer silhouette than previous decades, though bum rolls can still be worn and there is some visual evidence of their influence in some portraiture of the period. Now Spain, obviously this whole hoop skirt farthingale trend is something that Spain was particularly proud of and very much into, and the 17th century is no different. While England and France dropped the farthingale for half of the century, Spain was like, oh, you think the 1500s was extreme? Hold my cerveza. The hoops were so wide in Spain that you could hide 2 things of paella on either side of them. And what makes it even more odd is that so many of these portraits that survive of this style are portraits of like girls, like little girls, specifically Maria Theresa, Infanta of Spain and Portugal. And so they're already short and awkward as children, and then it's like bam and bam, heads and tails just going apeshit crazy in Proportion City. It's no wonder she looks so miserable in all of her portraits as a child. It's as if she knew that in the not so distant future, people would be turning her into memes or something.
This house is clean.
Where's the lie? I'll wait. Do these styles reflect common women in Spain? No, absolutely not. But the importance of the farthingale for royal Spanish women cannot be overlooked. For most of the 1600s, there doesn't really seem to be much else really to report. Petticoats are usually cartridge pleated and very full, and the addition of a bum roll can help hold out the skirts and provide more definition from the stays. All in all, the last half of the 1600s is pretty calm and quote-unquote normal for the lower half silhouettes.
I like big butts and I cannot lie. You other brothers can't deny.
Now, by the turn of the 18th century, while we have Spain going off doing whatever it's doing, French and English women have adopted a new style of gown called the mantua. It's a soft gown that is worn over a petticoat and stays, and one of the signature looks having the front skirts of the mantua fold back over itself and drape down the back of the skirt. Doing this gives the illusion of fullness at the hips, and the extra swagging down the back also adds fullness to the booty. So the wider hip, smaller waist goal is still achievable, but it doesn't seem that the bum rolls, farthingales, or any hoop is actually used. Then something weird happened. Something that I didn't actually start to put together until scripting out this video, and that's the return of the hoop skirt, or basically what appears to be a Spanish invasion. Though I don't think Spain is actually given proper credit for this influence. In fact, England actually seems to take the credit according to Kimberly Chrisman Campbell's 1996 paper called Unhoop the Fair Sex, the campaign against the hoop petticoat in 18th century England. However, we can all confirm that Spain was the originator of the farthingale, and the hoop skirt of the 18th century is nothing more than a variation on what Spain was already doing in the 15th, 16th, and 17th century. So I have a hard time giving England credit for the 18th century hoop skirt because, after all, fashion is nothing if not derivative. Skirt shapes changed so drastically in the 18th century, honestly what seems to be every 10 years or so, that we're gonna have to move pretty quickly through the century to make sure we can get through all of this. So buckle up, buttercup. While the 1700s had the mantua and softer skirt shapes, by the... No, Griffey. Pin tucks are good for small spaces to hold microphones, but when you got a Griffey who apparently really needs to go to the bathroom, he's gonna rip them off no matter what. So let's just get back to what we were doing. That was chaos. While the 1700s had the mantua and softer skirt shapes, by the 17 teens we are seeing the return of the hooped petticoat. The tattler likes to harp on the hooped petticoat quite a bit, very much in keeping with the mocking of farthingales from the previous century, and going so far as to create a satirical debate around the petticoat. Around. Get it? The common petticoat has not above 4 yards in the circumference, whereas this over our heads. Side note, in this story they've hung a hooped petticoat above their heads to inspect it, has more in the semi-diameter, I assume they mean radius, so that by allowing it 24 yards in the circumference. Obviously, there is satire and hyperbole humor at work here, but nonetheless, it is a great reference for us to confirm the hooped petticoat's existence and an idea of size during the 1700s. And for further reference, for those of you who are viewers who are not familiar with skirt hems, 4 yards or roughly 4 meters is a very normal skirt size for full-length skirts throughout most of history. They fit perfectly in that just full enough but not ridiculous category. The shape of the hooped petticoat was for a brief time still kind of rounded, domed, or bell-shaped, but very quickly it evolved into the iconic flat front, flat back that so many of us think of when we think of the 1700s, Marie Antoinette, etc. The largest point for this style was around the 1740s and 50s, illustrated by Queen Ulrika of Sweden's wedding robe de cour being over 7 feet wide at the widest point. However, since the hoops are flat in the front and flat in the back, fabric usage wasn't completely insane, as petticoats were very often smooth over the front and back of these hoops. And if we know that the most formal of formal is almost 8 feet wide at the widest point, it's safe to assume that most fashionable dress was probably closer to 4 feet wide at the widest. Additionally, it's important to understand the best way to view these hoops was to look at these women dead on, and not from the side or at 3/4. Turning to the side would completely change how the woman looked, because she wouldn't be wide from the side, but actually pretty flat. Now, to be clear, this is not to say that all women wore hoops during this period. Absolutely not. There were plenty of women from the nobility to lower sorts alike who did not wear hoops during the 18th century. They just were considered the height of fashion and covered a breadth of social statuses and occasions. But for a bit of levity here, here's a quote from a letter written by the Countess of Hertford to the Countess of Pomfret in the 1730s and 40s. I own myself so awkward as to be yet unable to use myself to that dress, unless for visits of ceremony, since I do not feel at home in my own house without an apron, nor can endure a hoop that would overturn all the chairs and stools in my closet. The size of these hoops vary by social status and location, going in and out with the decades, but by the 1770s the hoop is starting to shrink to a more logical and proportional size, and eventually it gives way to the false rump of the 1780s. While the authenticity of this Cork Rump's origin story is a bit dubious, it is nonetheless hilarious. According to a 1779 book entitled Nocturnal Revs, or the History of the King's Place, the origin of the Cork Rump is this. A fellow named Mr. Tape purchased 6 dozen long corks, which based off of the context of the story are wine bottle corks or something similar in shape and size, and didn't know what to do with them to turn it into an actual profitable investment instead of a complete and total waste of money. And like any anxiety-riddled millennial, Mr. Tape laid in bed agonizing over what to do with the long corks. Whilst he and his dear spouse were laying their heads together upon their pillows, a thought came into Mr. Tape's noddle that these same corks might be converted to some use. "Faith, my dear," said he, "I have it!" giving her a slap on the posteriori. "What do you think of a cork rump?" "Think," she replied, somewhat nettled at the pungent application of his hand. "I think it would have been a very useful thing just then and preserved me from that violent spank." Bad naughty suit.
You must tie her down on a bed and spank her.
"I beg your pardon, my dear," he rejoined. "I was so elated with the lucky thought that I really forgot myself. But I do not know whether the making of my fortune and that smack did not go hand in hand."
You must spank her well, and after you have spanked her, you may deal with her as you like. And
"If that is the case," she resumed, "I should not have minded if you had hit me 2 smacks and made mine and your fortune at the same time."
spank me. And spank me. And me. And me. Yes, you must give us all a good spanking.
Mr. Tape then jumped out of bed, hurried on his clothes, dived into the cellar, brought up the cargo of corks, set to work, and in a few hours produced a perfect cork rump, fit for a first-rate lady of fashion of almost any dimensions whatever. In the following afternoon, it was exhibited in the shop window, and Mrs. Baddeley, passing by, took a fancy to it, imagining it would be a great improvement to the gentility of her person, purchased it, and exhibited that very night in it upon the stage. So for lack of a better term, this rump went viral faster than Lil Nas X's pole dancing, and Mr. Tapes sold out of all the Cork Rumps so fast and to all of the fashionable ladies, including but not limited to the Duchess of Devonshire. I think we can call this an excellent investment. Additionally, Cork Rumps have added safety features rivaling that of a Subaru Outback. According to this article, in the summer of 1778, Mr. Tape's Cork Rumps saved 2 ladies from drowning as they were going out to Vauxhall Gardens. Quote, owing entirely to their being equipped with cork rumps from Mr. Tape's manufactory, which proved their utility far superior to the skill of medical society instituted for the recovery of drowned persons. So it's no surprise that cork rump surpassed the loathed hoop petticoat in popularity, as the false rump provides a much more flattering shape and has additional safety features at no additional cost. With a 0% APR, now's the best time to invest in a cork rump. Find your nearest cork rump dealership today. I don't know why I turned that into a car commercial for me, but here we are. I don't know. Welcome to my brain. Through the 1780s and early 1790s, we are all about that cork booty, and satirists are living for it. The fullness being at the side of the hips for so long has now firmly moved to the back, with a very full, rounded, and large derriere being the ideal shape for the lower part of the body. Fullness portion was usually about 2 times the size of the waist, and the fitted back styles of the 1780s and early 90s, as sacques or robe à la française gowns were no longer in fashion, really helped accentuate the Humpty Humpiness of the silhouette. In fact, shapes were so varied that some styles shown actually looked just like massive butts. Just huge. Let me tell you, under just a single silk petticoat with no gown over it, they can actually get kind of obscene looking. As it always is with the female form in fashion, men felt entitled to comment on it and mock it. And honestly, I'm glad that they did, because the satirical prints make it so much easier to understand the extreme quality of fashions of the 1780s and 90s, as well as how much women used padding and artifice to create that fashionable shape. The 1780s and 90s saw loads of satirical prints mocking the padding women wore to create that curvy, luscious shape that was in fashion. Once the mid-1790s hit though, we're in a whole fashion upheaval. Waistlines are under the bust, and the focus of the waist to hip ratio is now gone and will stay gone for about 30 years. There were small pads being worn, but they were usually to the mid-back area to help kick out the back of the skirts. Fullness all around in the 90s was the goal, and looking preggo was just as cool as being a 90s kid who got Eggos for breakfast. So for this video, the Regency period is pretty damn boring. With the skirts under the bust, there's really not a lot to discuss for ladies' hammy hocks. Men's wear, on the other hand, let's just say Tina Belcher wouldn't have known what to do with herself.
They couldn't take their eyes or butts off of each other.
Wait a minute, I take that back. For most people, the hoops were not being worn, but for the 1%ers who went to the English royal court, you got to still enjoy the archaic fashions of the hoop and look like one of those god-awful Barbie doll cakes, or worse, the Barbie doll toilet paper cover things that our grannies had in the guest bathrooms when we were growing up. It was, as the kids say, a look.
You're tacky and I hate you.
So with those monstrosities burned forever into our brains, okay, let's be honest, I actually kind of love that turn of the century English court dress. I mean, can you imagine if they had actually done that in Bridgerton? Oh God, like Daphne. It would have been great. I would have loved it. Fantastic. Now we're going to move forward to the 1830s, where skirts are back at the waist and fullness matters. The 1830s is also when we see what could possibly be the very first reference to the word bustle. Skirts in the 1830s were very full, held out by starched and corded petticoats, not too dissimilar from early Spanish farthingales. However, with the 1830s, there was a small emphasis on the booty, so often additional padding was needed to achieve a very fashion-forward, slightly booty-centric shape. In Workwoman's Guide from 1838, we can find instructions on how to make a bustle. Bustles are worn by those whose shape requires something to set off the skirts of the gown. They should not be too long or they look indelicate and in bad taste. They are made of jean, strong calico, and sometimes of glazed calico. Note, calico is a medium weight cotton fabric. Figure 30 represents a simple bustle of strong calico. It is composed of one piece, the width of the calico, say a yard, and 8 nails deep. Nails are a system of measurement that go nails, quarters, yards, and ells, One nail is 2¼ inches long, so 8 nails would be 18 inches. Also, as much as the rest of the world loves to make fun of the US for still using imperial measurements, at least we're not using nails, quarters, yards, and ells. Though, if anyone wanted to laser print me an L ruler, I would be forever grateful. Anyways, back to the quote. This piece is doubled in two so as to make 2 flounces, one 4.5 nails long and the other 3.5. At one nail from the double top, make a narrow case to admit of tapes. The bottoms of the flounces are hemmed with a very thick cord in them. When worn, the bustle is turned inside out, by which means the frill falls between the 2 flounces. Skirts at this time were cut in rectangles, usually selvage to selvage, around 4 yards wide. The 4 yards would have then been gathered up into the waist to help create that very full rounded effect around the hips. This shape is supported by bustles, padding, corded petticoats, and crinoline petticoats up through the 1850s until we see the advent of the steel-wired cage crinoline in 1856, or Farthingales 3.0, still huge, still bulge. From an 1857 book about American women, in this case, women from Cincinnati, Ohio. Crinoline is worn at all times, though difficult to manage on the heavy grades of the sidewalks. Like mules, they are sure-footed and get through the doughy mud of the streets with an agility at once surprising and amusing. I love being compared to a mule. It's great. Crinoline petticoats were considered quite large for this time, and as well as all overly large skirts was a point of mockery from the Wolverhampton Chronicle 1858. Crinoline in church. A few weeks ago, Punch presented a picture of a fashionable young lady in full crinoline, striving almost in vain to pass through the doorway of a country church, and exclaiming to a female companion how narrow the doorway is. A counterpart to the story actually occurred in a church in this town on Sunday week. The perils of the doorway were escaped, but those of the aisle were insurmountable, and in it the crinoline, which was subsequently picked up by the pew opener, was abandoned. We are hereby authorized to state that its fair owner may have it restored upon application to its present possessor. While in the 1850s and early 60s, the shape of the cage crinoline petticoat was circular, but by the end of the 1860s it had become more elliptical, which means that the fullness was organized towards the back over the bum. Small bum pads were also worn underneath the cage crinoline to help keep that fashionable shape. This creates the perfect segue into the first proper quote-unquote bustle era of the 1870s, with a massive focus on the booty. It was all about the booty. The skirts were still fairly wide and full, with loads of ruffles, pleats, and bows. The 1870s were very much into extreme femininity dress. And then seemingly, almost randomly, at the end of the 1870s, skirts shrink up in size around the hips and the waist and become what modern costumers and historians call the natural form era, even though there's nothing natural about this silhouette. No longer is there an over-exaggeration of the butt, but instead the skirts are fitted around the full rounded hip and bum, padded out to create that ideal 10 to 12 inch waist to hip ratio difference in proportion. This style is very much to be viewed and appreciated in the round, because no matter what direction you view the woman, there were curves everywhere, even if they themselves felt flat and exposed by comparison to earlier styles. Mirror's Journal, September 1879. The fight is on between inflation and flatness. It may last some time, but there is no doubt as to the issue. Flatness will succumb. Tourneurs, bustles have already appeared to support the long basques and the large pleats behind. We shall soon hail, perhaps next summer, the restoration of the crinoline under a new guise perhaps, but still performing the same duty. Even though fashion magazines seem to hate this narrow-fitted skirt shape, bustles and padding are still being worn to create that soft, large, curving hip and bum shape, but it just looks a bit more natural in comparison to previous decades. From 1881, letters pour in with queries as to the necessity for wearing the tournure, and all kinds of hopes and fears are expressed as to the coming in of the crinoline. All fashionable women wear a slight tournure, and even those who long hesitate on the brink of a mode must own the improvement to most figures. However, the style is actually really short-lived, and by the mid-1880s, we're back to big bustles, baby. The style for the 1885 to 1888 is very shelf-like. Fullness on the side of the hips is there, but nowhere near the same as the 1870s. The emphasis is very much on the butt itself and creating a shelf-like appearance. By the end of the 1880s and the beginning of the 1890s, though, boned bustles have given way to bum pads, and skirts become very quote-unquote normal in appearance by our modern eye. They're gored skirts, but with pleating or gathering at the bum, so to add fullness and a graceful line to the woman's silhouette without any bulk around the front or the side hips. Padding is worn to help create the ideal illusion of the 10 to 12 inch hip to waistline ratio, but the padding is meant to be a lot more subtle. From Good Housekeeping, May 1890. The foundation skirt of all gowns of wool or silk is now made of surah or some sort of soft, durable silk. It is finished with a single steel placed about where the second steel had been, and if the figure requires, a small bustle, but only enough to give a graceful outline to the form. All the French dresses imported were without pads, and in some cases without steels, but these presuppose a perfect figure, and in the majority of cases when the gowns were sold and refitted, a slight bustle was found necessary. A perceptible bustle, however, is in the worst taste at present. Only at the very end of the 1890s, when the skirts become quite fitted in the hip, do you see the return of the wire bustle. Still very small, but it's meant to help pronounce the back end and make it pop out just a little bit. As always with the 1900s, shit goes bananas after the first decade. Honestly, the first 10 years of the 1900s isn't terribly different from the end of the 1890s. Wide hips and a full rounded bum are the ideal, and if you were lacking in that department, you just added hip improvers and bum pads to create that Camille Clifford silhouette. But by the 19-teens, the Empire style is back, and it required slim hips and a smooth bum. The mid-19-teens do see full skirts coming back, but they're full all the way around, and the frilly conical skirt shape is back until the 1920s. Then that's when the waist drops and no hips or butts are wanted. You gotta look like this. The curvy, close-fitting styles of the early 1930s through the 40s prefer a natural body shape with no padding except at the shoulders. It's not until Dior's new look in the 1950s with full skirts do we see the return of petticoats for full skirts and that nipped-in waist appearance. Of course, this was actually still a relatively short-lived trend, though societal expectations and gender norms of the 1950s don't seem to want to die out as quickly as the dress styles did. Then it's 1960s, 1970s, and 80s, with bell-bottom pants, Calvin Klein jeans that require two people to put them on, all to culminate in 1999 with low-rise jeans so tight and so low that women's thongs were visible. It was called the whale tail, and they definitely didn't give 13-year-old girls body issues. Oh no, definitely not. It was bad, trust me. And with that, my lovely friends, we have completed 500 years of butts. I do hope I made Tina Belcher proud.
She grabbed Jimmy Jr.'s butt. Everyone began to touch each other's butts.
And if you are curious about my sources for this video, the link to my citations can be found in the description below. I had a great time researching this video, and I hope that you all enjoyed it as well. I'll see you all back here next week with a new video, and until then, my friends, have a lovely, bootylicious rest of your week.
Does my butt look good?
Your butt looks great.
Excellent, good. I'm doing just fine. Fire extinguisher, well, you're next.
It's Griff peeing on
Okay.
us, that's the fire extinguisher.
Right. Just match you with her. You hit me on the tail.